So we've all gone through stuff, and I wanted to do I consider myself more of a teacher, but this is kind of where maybe I put my preacher hat on, as weird as that sounds. I compartmentalize the two ideas, even though most people kind of look at them the same. What's that? That's true, yeah. Because I'm not a preacher. There is no preacher hat. But seriously, though, it's one of those things where I've been thinking about this for several days, and over the past several weeks, with people I've talked to here, with people I've talked to in my family, people I've talked to in my work, like so many people are going through stuff. And if you're like me, you ask questions. And it's like, okay, well, most of us, and everybody here in this room, endeavors to keep the Father's commandments. And we read in our Bibles where we have all of these promises of blessings and prosperity and all these things that are supposed to come upon His people for obeying Him. But then we go through these rough patches. So like for me, as an example, back in 2015, we were expecting a baby boy. Didn't know he was going to be a boy at that point, but we lost him about 16 weeks in. And, I personally was angry at the Father. Just to be honest here, because this is something I feel like we all need to be honest about. We all deal with this stuff. And it took me several weeks to really overcome that, because I'm thinking, like what I just said, here I am keeping your Shabbat, I'm eating clean, I'm doing all these things, trying to live a holy, righteous life. And I can show you chapter and verse where you say that if your people do this, they won't suffer miscarriage. Well, what just happened here? And so I finally got over that and I made peace, but it is something that I went through. And I think if we're all honest, we all go through that kind of thing at some point in our life, sometimes multiple times. So what I want to do with this is we're going to go through the scriptures, because when we look at our relationship with Yahweh, who are we? Like, who are we? What is the endeavor? We're Israel, right? So I want to take a look at this aspect of being an Israelite. We're going to take a look at our father Jacob. We're going to read a couple chapters out of Genesis to kind of get this started. And then we're going to take a look at some incidents and some people in the Bible that went through things and said some things, quite frankly. Some of the stuff we're going to read, if we didn't have it in the Bible and I just started saying this, I would expect lightning to strike me down. Or, maybe just a keel over dead like in the book of Acts, this kind of stuff. But yet we have men after Yahweh's own heart speaking this way. We have prophets speaking this way. And so we're just going to kind of address how we can handle these kinds of things. So Genesis 32, we're going to read the whole chapter. This is Jacob's coming back from all his time with Laban, or Laban. He's done his years and years of hard service there. They had the whole thing where he waited 7 years for Rachel and he ended up with Leah. So he waited 7 years more, and it was like nothing to him because he loved her that much. And Laban was constantly changing his wages 10 times and taking advantage of him. And Jacob just took it, and finally Jacob had enough, and he's like, I'm going home. So this is where we're at. And of course, waiting for him at home is good brother Esau. And they were not the best of friends, were they? Okay, so verse 1, Genesis chapter 32. Now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Now, when I first read this is one of those things when I read the Bible sometimes, you have this thing that's in there just kind of casually. It's like, oh, I was going to the grocery store and some angels just met me. Just out of nowhere, like, oh, hey, how you doing, angels? The life of the patriarchs, right? Jacob said when he saw them, this is Elohim's camp. So he named that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau and the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, thus you shall say to my master Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my master that I may find favor in your sight. Because at this point, his last memory of Esau was, he's out to kill me. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So Esau is bringing a small army to meet his brother after Yahweh has basically told him to go back. So if I'm Jacob, I'm sitting here thinking like, well, you want me to go back to my homeland. You want me to go back to this land that was promised to me and my descendants through my father and his father. And what's waiting for me is Esau and an army of 400 men. This is great. Then Jacob was greatly afraid, verse 7, and distressed. And he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. For he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. Jacob said, O Elohim of my father Abraham and Elohim of my father Isaac, O Yahweh, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. So Jacob here is invoking the promise. This is the promise that we are all heirs to if we are descendants of Abraham by faith. Paul talks about that in Galatians and other places. So he is invoking this. So Jacob has a pickle here. He's like, okay, you want me to come back to this place that you promised me and my descendants, but yeah, my brother is coming at me with a small army of, mercenaries or whatever, and I'm having to divide my own family here. So if he takes, a couple of wives out and their kids, at least I don't lose the whole group. And so his response here is not to say, your will be done or anything like that, like we typically tend to do when we are asking a blessing or something from Yahweh. He's going back to, you promised me this. And this is kind of one of the themes that I'm going to get into here. We have a precedent as Israelites that we can hold Yahweh accountable for his promises. And as that comes out of my mouth, I'm thinking like, ooh, it makes me cringe a little bit to say that. But we see it in our Bibles. So let's keep going here. We were in verse 13. So he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels, which is interesting, and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He delivered him into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on before me and put a space between droves. He commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Then you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my master Esau. Behold, he is also behind us. Then he commanded also the second and the third and all those who followed the droves, saying, after this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp. Now he arose that same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Verse 24, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. This is one of the more fascinating things in the Bible. Who is this man? When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So this is the man that he's wrestling with. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he was wrestling with him. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. So whoever this man is, he seems to be bare minimum an angel. He could be a pre-incarnate Yahshua. He doesn't really say who he is. But either way, this is not merely a man. I can't just reach out and touch somebody and dislocate their thigh. I don't have that kind of strength, but whoever this is does. And the fact that Jacob is wrestling with him all night, and what does he say? I will not let you go until you bless me. And if we look at Jacob's character, this goes all the way back to when he was born. His name means heel grabber. So he was already trying to take a blessing from Esau before they were even born, because Esau was the firstborn. That's where the birthright goes to. And we know that because of Rebekah knew the promise, that Jacob would be the one to inherit all those things. She engineered the events that led to Esau giving up his birthright. But in any case, from the get-go, Jacob was always going after the blessing. He was always doing whatever he could, and people translate his name as deceiver. To me, that's almost a pejorative, because I don't think he was being maliciously deceitful. I think he was just doing what he needed to do to obtain the blessing. Okay, so verse 27. So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob," as if he didn't already know. He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with Elohim and with men and have prevailed." Now here's a question. If you strive with Elohim and with men and prevail, it's not too hard to understand how we can prevail over other humans. But how does a human prevail over Elohim? And we know in this case, if this was like the Father, you're not overcoming the Most High in a wrestling match. So I don't know the mechanics of how this went down and how they were able to wrestle all night, without the angel getting the upper hand. But in any case, so verse 29, then Jacob asked him and he said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. And we see an echo of that later when the angel comes to, was it Gideon? Or was it, no, it was Manoah, it was Samson's dad. And he asked the angel what his name is. And he says, what is it to you? "My name is Wonderful." I'm paraphrasing. He just doesn't tell his name. Okay, so where were we? Verse 30. So Jacob named that place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen Elohim face to face, yet my life has been preserved." So whoever this man was, Jacob has a perception that it's some type of, at a minimum, maybe an angelic being, okay? Because he says Elohim, he doesn't say Yahweh, so there's room for debate. And I've actually seen scholars debate on who this is. And anyway, now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. So Jacob has overcome all of these adversities in his life. This is after the promise, and he's still going through all of these sufferings and all these trials. And he holds out for the blessing. He wrestles all night for the blessing. So let's go to Genesis 35, a couple chapters over. And of course, Israel comes from a root that means to contend or to persevere. And in the lexicons and things that I've read, there's debate over who is doing the overcoming. I've seen people interpret it as, Yahweh overcomes. So like you have the word El in there, Yahweh overcomes, Yahweh contends. I've seen translations where they say, contending with Elohim or striving with Elohim. But the person that Jacob wrestled with specifically told Jacob that he was naming him that because Jacob overcame. He persevered against man and Elohim. So I think the name has to do with humans overcoming and persevering against Elohim and man. So Genesis 35, we'll read the first 22 verses. It's sort of almost a repeat of the naming of Israel here, but it's a different circumstance. Then Elohim said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and live there, and make an altar there to Elohim, and who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau," which we just read about. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away your foreign Elohim, your gods, which are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to Elohim, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." So he acknowledges there was a day of distress. He acknowledges that he struggled. And even with all of that, ever since that moment, Elohim has been with him wherever he went. It's hard at times to feel like he's with us, isn't it? There are times when, where is he? I just don't see him in my life. Jacob is kind of going through some of that historically. Okay, so verse 4. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which are in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. As they journeyed, there was a great terror upon the cities which were around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. He built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because there Elohim had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak. It was named Alon Bakut. Verse 9, Then Elohim appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. Elohim said to him, Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. And so this begs the question, this already happened 2 chapters previously. So is this Did he forget that he had had this encounter with Jacob and he named him? Like, I speculate that whoever this man was that Jacob wrestled with might have been like a garden variety angel of some sort, which you can class as a type of Elohim because they are mightier than us. And maybe that was like a more prophetic type utterance, but Yahweh himself is confirming that here, if that makes any sense. So thus he called him Israel. Elohim also said to him, I am Elohim Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. Then Elohim went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. So Jacob named the place where Elohim had spoken with him Bethel. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, Do not fear, for now you have another son. It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Ben-Yamin. And of course, Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow, and Ben-Yamin, Benjamin, means son of my right hand. So she gave him a name, and then Jacob turned it around for something more positive. So verse 19, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. It came about that while Israel was dwelling in the land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. So we have this reutterance of Elohim telling Jacob that, he's going to be blessed. He's reiterating the promise made to Abraham and Isaac, and he's calling him Israel. And then the first thing that happens is the woman that he worked all those years for dies in childbirth, like immediately. Like there's if I just read this in order, there's like almost no pause. And so it's almost like Yahweh set him up and just pulled the rug right out from under him. And if I'm Jacob and I'm this situation and I'm being honest with myself, this is not a fun place to be. And I mean, just for me personally, I've experienced places where I've, perceived Yahweh was, blessing me, Yahweh was working with me in a positive way, and then all of a sudden the bottom just falls out. And so you end up with these questions like, well, is he with me or is he not? And I'm assuming most people here in this room, if not everybody, have experienced that in some way. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I bet if I did, they would all go up. So in any case, being an Israelite is about struggling. It's about wrestling with Elohim. And I'm going to make the case here that not only can that be a positive thing if we frame it correctly, but it's also an expectation. Because at the end of the day, if we don't call out for Yahweh's blessing, if we don't keep after that blessing the way Israel did, even when it looks like we're not going to get it, what does that tell us about Yahweh as a promise maker? If we just give up and say, well, he's not going to bless me because he's cursing me now, or however we frame it, then we're casting doubt on his provision, we're casting doubt on his sovereignty, we're casting doubt on these promises that he made. And if he fails to keep one promise, like in this case, if he doesn't keep the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we can't trust him for anything. When he promises eternal life, we can't trust him for that. When he promises forgiveness of sins, we can't count on that. If he fails us in any way, the whole thing it's a house of cards that falls. So I think that Yahweh has set this up expecting us to hold him accountable. Not in a judgmental, high-handed way, but in a way that shows faith in his promises. And I realize that may be kind of a nuanced way to look at it, but that's kind of how I'm perceiving it these days. So let's go to Genesis 40. We're going to go to the story of Joseph, another man with some hills and valleys in his life. Genesis 40. I'm going to read the whole chapter. Then it came about after these things, this is while he's in prison. He's had the whole thing with Potiphar's wife, and now he's in jail. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with these two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them. He took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to Elohim? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house." So Joseph has set this up that Elohim is going to give him the interpretation. And by invoking that, he is counting on the fact that Yahweh will do that. Because if he doesn't get a proper interpretation on these dreams, Joseph just looks like an idiot. He looks like a fool. So he's kind of putting his own reputation on the line here by leaning into Yahweh's. And so we get into verse 15. "For in fact, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon." So he's obviously not being blessed in the physical here. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, "I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said to him, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Thus it shall come about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." So Joseph just did this incredible thing. He just did what only someone who has, people say the Holy Spirit's not in the Old Testament. How do we explain this kind of stuff? So here's a man that obviously had an interaction with Yahweh and counted on him, and he's looking at this thing and, okay, well, when this cupbearer gets out of here and goes back to Pharaoh, he's going to tell Pharaoh what happened here, and I'm going to finally get out of here. But then the rug gets ripped out from under him, and he's stuck in jail because the cupbearer forgot. Does this sound like blessing? Does this sound like abundance and prosperity? That this is wrestling with Elohim. Of course, we all know that had a happy ending after a while. Joseph got out of jail. He was used as a blessing for the nations as well as his own brothers. But in the meantime, there's some serious question marks. If I'm Joseph and I'm in that jail and this is happening to me, I'm asking some serious questions about, is Yahweh going to step in for here? Like what is going on here? And there's nothing. If we notice, if we were to read the whole account on all these scriptures we're going to read here, there's nothing where it says that person was condemned for having these thoughts. This person was struck down. This person was cut off for questioning Elohim or any of these things. And I'm saying this as confidently as I can because I know that this kind of thing can be touchy. But I'm having confidence that this is being pulled from the Word, and this isn't like rebellion or high-handedness. So Judges 6, we're going to see another case of somebody with questions, somebody wondering what's going on. This is Gideon. Judges 6. And I don't know if I'll read the whole chapter, but we'll get through the relevant parts. So let's start at the beginning. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel, Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock in their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried to Yahweh. Now it came about when the sons of Israel cried to Yahweh on account of Midian, that Yahweh sent a prophet to the sons of Israel, and he said to them, Thus says Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out from the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors, and dispossessed them before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not obeyed me. So Yahweh's laying it out here. This isn't just, happenstance. This isn't me just being mean to you guys. This is because you guys rebelled against me. And so now stuff is happening. All the stuff that I promised would happen to get you guys in line and hopefully wake you up is upon you. Verse 11. Then the angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak, which is in Orpha, which belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O valiant warrior. As he's trembling in fear, hiding from the Midianites, Then Gideon said to him, Oh, my master, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us, saying, Did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now Yahweh has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. So if we just pause there and fast forward to present day, you've got this whole branch of theology called cessationism. I mean, most Christians believe that when the Bible was canonized, when the book of Revelation was written, all of these miracles that the Holy Spirit did among the people stopped. You don't have healings anymore. You don't have, speaking in tongues. You don't have any of these things. You don't have these miraculous things that Yahweh was doing. And, Gideon's in a spot here where he's kind of thinking the same thing. Like, it's been all this time. Where are all the miracles? Where are all these righteous, mighty deeds that we've heard about? Why aren't you stepping in and showing yourself for good for our people? And I personally think with, cessationism, the purpose of the Holy Spirit is to do holy things. So if we're not going to do holy things, why would Yahweh fill us with the power of his Holy Spirit so we can do all this stuff? The way we are in this society, we would just take that power and we would do like Simon the sorcerer, and we would just go out and do all this self-glorifying stuff. That's how far we've fallen collectively. Hopefully nobody in this room, but I'm just speaking about the society in general. So Gideon has some serious questions here. Verse 14. Yahweh looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? He said to him, O master, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I'm the youngest in my father's house. That sounds like David a little bit later. But Yahweh said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. So Gideon said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you and bring out my offering and lay it here before you. And he said, I will remain until you return. So Gideon, I've seen sermons on this where at this point, Gideon is judged or condemned from the pulpit for having a lack of faith here. He just told you he was going to be with you. He just told you he was going to use you to deliver Israel. And now you're kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, are you? Or are you like, And my question is, would we do any better if we were in that spot? I don't know. We're humans too. So verse 19. Then Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour, and he put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, and brought them out to him under the oak and presented them. The angel of Elohim said to him, Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on the rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of Yahweh put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of Yahweh vanished from his sight. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of Yahweh, he said, "Alas, O Yahweh Elohim, for now I have seen the angel of Yahweh face to face." Sounds a little bit like what Jacob said when he wrestled, right? "Now I have seen Elohim face to face." Yahweh said to him, "Peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die." Verse 24, Then Gideon built an altar there to Yahweh and named it Yahweh is Peace. To this day it is still in Ophrah of the Israelites. Now on the same night, Yahweh said to him, "Take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to Yahweh your Elohim on top of this stronghold in an orderly manner. And take a second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down." Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as Yahweh had spoken to him. And because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. So even though he's got this promise that Yahweh's going to be with him, he's still being sneaky about it. Like, I don't want to get busted tearing down my dad's altar. I'm getting in trouble. So he's doing it. He's kind of stepping out, but there's still some questions. There's still some faith issues here. Verse 28, When the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was torn down, and the Asherah which was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar which had been built. They said one to another, "Who did this thing?" And when they searched out and inquired, they said, "Gideon, the son of Joash, did this thing." Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die. For he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah which was beside it," which shouldn't have been there to begin with in the land of Israel. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend or strive?" That same word we looked at earlier. "Will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him? Whoever will plead for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because someone has torn down his altar." Therefore on that day he named him Jerubbaal, that is to say, "Let Baal contend against him, because he had torn down his altar." And so this is fascinating to me, because we are Israelites, contending with Elohim. But then we have this whole thing here, let Baal contend for himself. It's almost like an opposite kind of wordplay here. So like, these are people who are supposed to be Israelites. They're supposed to be, contending with Yahweh, or Yahweh contending with them, however you interpret it with the translation. But they're in a position here to where they've got altars of Baal in their midst, and they have this man saying, "Let Baal contend for himself." It's just fascinating to me. Okay, verse 33. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of Yahweh, which is only supposed to be in the New Testament, came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they were also called together to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. Then Gideon said to Elohim, "If you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I will know that you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken." So we like to say, well, we would have believed Yahweh. He plainly said he was going to do this. We would never put out a fleece, and because he still is questioning whether or not Yahweh is actually going to do what Yahweh said. And from his perspective, I kind of don't blame him, because like he said earlier, where are all these miracles? Where's all these mighty things, that we've heard that you do among your people? I don't see it. So based on his background and his experience, I can logically see why he is doing this, even though we in modern times would look at this as an obvious lack of faith. I think there's a reason for it. Verse 38, And it was so, when he arose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to Elohim, "Do not let your anger burn against me, that I may speak once more. Please let me make a test once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew on all the ground." Elohim did so that night, for it was dry only on the fleece, and dew was on all the ground. Now, the part that's missing here is the part where Yahweh struck Gideon down for daring to question him, where he just keeled over dead for having, a crisis of faith, or however we would frame it. Yahweh is still, he's working with him. He's allowing, Yahweh is okay with being questioned here. He gives Gideon what he's asking for. Even though we would say, well, maybe this was presumptuous, it kind of reminds me of Abraham when he's bargaining with Elohim. Well, what if there's 50 in Sodom? What if there's 40 righteous? And he just goes all the way down to 10. To have the confidence in your Creator to be able to speak to him honestly and openly. Because Abraham's looking at a whole community of people. He probably had friends, and we know he had relatives in Sodom. We know he had Lot and his family. And so, to actually have the trust and faith in Yahweh to speak honestly to him about these types of things, I think is one of the defining traits of an Israelite. So 1 Chronicles 13. 1 Chronicles 13. Now we're going to read a little bit about a man after Yahweh's own heart. Of course, we know who that is, right? David. 1 Chronicles 13. This is the incident with the ark on the ox cart. And I've got a handful of scriptures like this, but if we were, and Karen had asked me earlier, what scriptures should I look at, ahead of time? And I told her all the depressing ones. If we're honest about this whole idea, we can find this type of stuff cover to cover. We can go to the book of Revelation and we can see the beast overcoming the saints. That's tough. That's heavy stuff. We, the people of Yahweh, it's not a bed of roses for us. So 1 Chronicles 13. Then David consulted with the captains of the thousands and the hundreds, even with every leader. David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it is from Yahweh, our Elohim, let us send everywhere to our kinsmen who remain in all the land of Israel. Wait, is this one? Yeah. Yeah, okay, I'm in the right spot. I thought I was on the wrong page for a second. Okay, our kinsmen who remain in all the land of Israel, also to the priests and Levites who were with them in their cities with pasture lands, that they may meet with us. And let us bring back the ark of our Elohim to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. So David's trying to do something good here. Then all the assembly said that they would do it. So the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So David assembled all Israel together from the Shihor of Egypt even to the entrance of Hamath to bring the ark of Elohim from Kiriath Jearim. David and all Israel went up to Baalah, that is to Kiriath Jearim, which belongs to Judah, to bring up from there the ark of Elohim, Yahweh, who is enthroned above the cherubim, where his name is called. They carried the ark of Elohim on a new cart from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio drove the cart. So they could have just grabbed some random cart that was around, but because they view Yahweh as holy, they said, let's do a brand new cart. It's almost like when you go to offer a sacrifice, you bring the best of what you have. You don't bring something blemished, something that's old and crippled. You bring the very best. They found a brand new cart to try to do something that they're seeing as a righteous and noble thing to do here. Verse 8, David and all Israel were celebrating before Elohim with all their might, even with songs and with lyres, harps and tambourines, cymbals and with trumpets. When they came to the threshing floor of Chidon, Uzzah put out his hand to hold the ark because the oxen nearly upset it. The anger of Yahweh burned against Uzzah, so he struck him down because he put out his hand to the ark, and he died there before Elohim. So here we have a case. David and all the people are trying to do something that we would say is a righteous, noble, worthy thing to do. They're trying to actually provide a proper place for Yahweh to dwell among them as much as he can be, right? Because can he dwell in buildings made of stone? They're trying to do something good here. And the rug gets ripped out from under him. Poor Uzzah is trying to do the right thing. He could have just let the ark fall, but because of his reverence and his respect for Yahweh, he tries to do the right thing and he reaches out to steady it, and he dies. So, verse 11, then David became angry because of Yahweh's outburst against Uzzah, and he called that place Perez Uzzah to this day. So Yahweh was angry with Uzzah for trying to do something good, and David is now angry. It doesn't say it in the text, but it's implied that David is angry at Yahweh. I don't know if you guys do this, but if I know that someone is angry at me and I can't think why, that makes me angry. I'm angry that you're angry at me. David doesn't understand yet what happened here. He's having an emotional response to this tragedy that just happened as he's trying to do something good. David was afraid of Elohim that day, saying, "How can I bring the ark of Elohim home with me?" So David did not take the ark with him to the city of David, but took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Thus the ark of Elohim remained with the family of Obed-Edom in the house 3 months, and Yahweh blessed the family of Obed-Edom with all that he had. Of course, we know later, David and the priests go back to the drawing board. They consult the Torah, and they figure, oh, the Levites are supposed to carry the ark on poles. That's how it's supposed to go. And they do that, and it works. So the point of the matter is here, was David struck down? David got angry. David didn't, we put David up on this pedestal sometimes, because, he's this king of Israel, and we know that he had a really crazy, dramatic life with his kids and, Bathsheba and everything. But it does say that he was a man after Yahweh's own heart. He wrote Psalm 119. But even he got angry at Yahweh for something that he perceived as something that shouldn't have happened. And of course later he found out that he was in the wrong. But in this moment, he experienced something that I think we all experience, and Yahweh didn't destroy him. So things like this tell me that Yahweh is okay on some level with us having these types of feelings in our relationship with him. Jeremiah 20, the weeping prophet. All the depressing scriptures, right? Jeremiah 20. I'm hoping that by the time we're done, this will be encouraging. That's where I'm trying to go. Jeremiah 20. Jeremiah had a rough life. Jeremiah 20. If I can ever get there. When Pashur the priest, the son of Immer, who was the chief officer in the house of Yahweh, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things, Pashur had Jeremiah the prophet beaten and put him in the stocks that were at the upper Benjamin gate, which is by the house of Yahweh. On the next day, when Pashur released Jeremiah from the stocks, Jeremiah said to him, "Pashur is not the name Yahweh has called you, but rather Magor Misabib. For thus says Yahweh, behold, I am going to make you a terror to yourself and to all your friends, and while your eyes look on, they will fall by the sword of their enemies. So I will give over all Judah to the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will carry them away as exiles to Babylon, and will slay them with the sword. I also will give over all the wealth of this city, all its produce and all its costly things, even all the treasures of the kings of Judah I will give over to the hand of their enemies, and they will plunder them, take them away, and bring them to Babylon. And you, Pashur, and all who live in your house will go into captivity, and you will enter Babylon, and there you will die, and there you will be buried, you and all your friends to whom you have falsely prophesied." So this is Yahweh just saying, basically, I told you guys long ago under Moses that you guys were going to fall away from me, you were going to rebel and backslide, worship other Elohim, and that when you did that, I was going to remove you from the land and put you in the hand of your enemies. You knew I was going to do that, and you still did it anyway. And so, this is the thing that Gideon was wrestling with, because Gideon, if you think about it, Gideon was several generations removed from Moses. And it only takes one generation for the people to completely fall off and for culture to shift. So Gideon didn't have that same understanding going into the story as someone like maybe Joshua would have had, that had a more firsthand experience and was closer to all those events in Egypt. Okay, so Jeremiah's complaint. My New American Standard here has this section, Jeremiah's complaint. "O Yahweh, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. You have overcome me and prevailed." That whole Israel thing, right? Overcoming, prevailing. "I have become a laughingstock all day long. Everyone mocks me. For each time I speak, I cry aloud. I proclaim violence and destruction. Because for me, the word of Yahweh has resulted in reproach and derision all day long. But if I say, I will not remember him or speak any more in his name, then in my heart it becomes like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary of holding it in, and I cannot endure it. For I have heard the whispering of many, terror on every side. Denounce him, yes, let us denounce him. All my trusted friends watching for my fall say, perhaps he will be deceived, so that we may prevail against him and take our revenge on him. But Yahweh is with me like a dread champion. Therefore my persecutors will stumble and not prevail. They will be utterly ashamed because they have failed. With an everlasting disgrace, they will not be forgotten, or that will not be forgotten. Yet, O Yahweh of hosts, you who test the righteous, that's key to this whole thing. You who test the righteous, who see the mind and the heart, let me see your vengeance on them. For to you I have set forth my cause. Sing to Yahweh, praise Yahweh, for he has delivered the soul of the needy one from the hand of evildoers. I'm going to pause there for a second. He starts off saying, "Oh Yahweh, you have deceived me, and I was deceived." Like, he's speaking to Yahweh. He's not just casually talking to his wife or a friend of his and saying Yahweh. No, he's speaking directly to Yahweh saying this. And so this sets up the idea that Jeremiah understands this idea of wrestling or contending with Yahweh, with Elohim. That he has the confidence to actually go before Yahweh with a complaint. Because from Jeremiah's perspective, ever since he entered into service with Yahweh, his life has been miserable. His life has been shameful. His life has been the dregs of society. And he's openly telling Yahweh this. How many of us, if we had the opportunity to speak directly to Yahweh, and we know that that avenue is available through prayer, but as Jeremiah being a prophet, it's a next level type of communication. And he still takes advantage of that channel to say these words to the Almighty. And he's not struck down dead, and he's not condemned for it. He's going to say some more tough things. Verse 14, "Cursed be the day when I was born. Let the day not be blessed when my mother bore me." Sounds like the book of Job. "Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, saying, a baby boy has been born to you, and made him very happy. And let the man be like the cities, which Yahweh overthrew without relenting. And let him hear an outcry in the morning and a shout of alarm at noon. Because he did not kill me before birth, so that my mother would have been my grave, and her womb ever pregnant. Why did I ever come forth from the womb, to look on trouble and sorrow, so that my days have been spent in shame?" And then we go on to the next prophecy. This is some heavy stuff, right? And I won't ask for a show of hands, but again, I bet they would all go up if I said, if we're honest with ourselves, have we thought things like this? Even if we didn't direct it at the Almighty himself the way Jeremiah did here, I would think that we have all come to some point in our life, and if we haven't, it's probably coming, where we get to this point where we have legitimate complaints about our situation. Where we're looking and we're like, here I am trying to serve you, yet here I am in this position. And the theme that I'm seeing here is that Israel, because of their covenantal nature with the Almighty, is able to communicate with him openly about these things. As parents, we would hope that if our children have a complaint against us, if they perceive that we've wronged them in some way or harmed them in some way, we would hope that they would have the faith in us, the relational faith in us, to be able to come to us and express that to us without worrying about being kicked out of the family, or in some cultures, murdered. There are cultures where if you dare to challenge the family, you are dead. We see that in some of the Islamic countries and some of the more extreme cases. But Israel, this whole idea that we can have this tight relationship with the Almighty, and it's something that I think is natural, this form of communication. And I think it's healthy. I'm coming to see as I walk this walk, longer and longer, it's a healthy thing to be able to verbalize these types of things. Habakkuk. Let's go to the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk takes what Jeremiah did and puts it on steroids. So Habakkuk, I remember the first time I read Habakkuk, I was like, wow. Because growing up in the South, like I was, there's this whole like stereotype or meme or whatever, where like, what's the saying? I can't remember it now. But basically, like if you backtalk your mom, you're gonna get like dealt with really bad, I wish I could remember the phrase. It's been so long since I lived in Texas. Anyway. Oh yeah, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Yeah, has anybody heard that? Maybe it's not just a Southern thing. Yeah, right? But seriously, like if our own parents are able to, if we backtalk our parents or if we question them or any of these type things, and imagine going to the creator of the universe. He really did bring us into this world. He really can take us out twice, right? First and second death. Mom and dad can't do that, thankfully. Okay, so Habakkuk. Habakkuk, we're just going to read the first chapter. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet. So here's another prophet. This is not some random guy like me. This is a legit prophet. How long, O Yahweh, will I call for help and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore the law of the Torah is ignored and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore justice comes out perverted. Yahweh's response, verse 5. Look among the nations, observe. Be astonished, wonder. Because I am doing something in your days, you would not believe it if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth, to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their hordes of faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings. And rulers are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up rubble to capture it. Then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, those whose strength is their Elohim. So, Habakkuk comes out and he's basically like, this is terrible. Why are you letting the wicked just run and do all this stuff? Where's all these promises that the wicked will perish and all of these things? Like, there's scripture after scripture after scripture. Habakkuk as a prophet would have been aware of these things. And he's looking around and he's being like, I don't see these things happening to the wicked. When we read the book of Proverbs, it's all about how the wicked are judged, the wicked are this, the wicked are that. And it's like, we don't always see it. And so Yahweh's response is, you ain't seen nothing yet. Let me tell you about these Chaldeans. So Yahweh doesn't just say, you know what, Habakkuk, you're right. I kind of overdid it a little bit here. Let me give you guys some blessings. No, Yahweh pours it on even more. So Habakkuk's response, verse 12, are you not from everlasting, O Yahweh, my Elohim, my Holy One? We will not die. So he's the fact that he's saying we will not die, to me, he's invoking the promise of the covenant. You, O Yahweh, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Why have you made men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things without a ruler over them? The Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net, and burn incense to the fishing net, because through these things their catch is large, and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slay nations without sparing? And then Yahweh goes on to continue to basically say what he's going to do to deal with these nations. So Habakkuk, after saying these things that I would be afraid to say, like I'm not saying that to the Almighty. Habakkuk just says it freely. And Yahweh explains to him what's happening, and Yahweh makes it clear, and Habakkuk voices here that he understands, okay, I accept that this is judgment coming on my people for what we've done. But it still doesn't stop Habakkuk from seeing the apparent discrepancy here. Why are the wicked prospering? Yes, I know you're going to use the wicked to judge us for what we did, but that doesn't change the fact that they're out there prospering in their wickedness, and you're doing nothing to stop them. These are honest words that I think for most of us would be hard to say. I know they are for me. So a couple more scriptures and then we'll wrap it up. Isaiah 62. Isaiah 62. The first couple of years I did tabernacles back in Oklahoma, I was in the praise band. The first year I played bass, and the leader actually changed the lyrics of this song. On Your Walls, O Jerusalem. We play it here sometimes, and everybody dances to it. there's a line in there that he didn't feel comfortable with because he felt like it was a little almost blasphemous. And so he changed the line. We'll read it here once I get to it. Isaiah 62. This whole idea of holding Yahweh accountable to do what he said he would do. Isaiah 62, we'll read verses 6 and 7. On your walls, O Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen. All day and all night they will never keep silent. You who remind Yahweh, take no rest for yourselves and give him no rest until he establishes and makes Jerusalem a praise in all the earth. Like that one line there, pester him, bug him, stay on his case until he does what he said he was going to do. That's how we would say that if we were in colloquial modern English, you know? And there's nothing in here that says when you do that, you fall out of favor with Elohim. There's nothing saying that when you hold him accountable to keep his covenants and do the things he's promised his people, that he's going to strike you down or that you're going to lose your salvation or any of these things. This is just a people striving and contending with their Elohim. And I think that Yahweh allows us to do this as a means of showing this close, intimate trust. He speaks freely with us all the time. I mean, when we read our scriptures, Yahweh is very frank about what he thinks about us. To the point of, there are chapters in the Bible in Ezekiel that I can't even read with my kids because Yahweh is so direct in how he describes how we look in his sight. But we're seeing precedent here where within reason, we don't want to be, high-handed or rebellious, but within reason and in the right framework and the right spirit, we are able to communicate freely with him our troubles, even when we perceive that they come from him. Maybe that we've been wronged, maybe we're in a place where we shouldn't be, and it's no fault of our own. Like from Job's perspective, we could spend all day in the book of Job. Job had no idea what happened in Job chapter 1. He had no idea about this thing going on, this between Yahweh and Satan and all this. He had no clue any of this stuff in the moment. All he knew was what he was dealing with on the ground. He was a righteous man, and on paper he did nothing to deserve what happened to him. He was wrestling with that idea, and of course his friends just piled on, right? But his friends, we pile on his friends because they came on and basically just accused him. But his friends were just being honest with him. His friends didn't have a full understanding of what was going on either. But they had a relationship as friends to where they were able to speak openly and honestly with Job. And they had the respect for him that those first 7 days when they got there, they didn't even say a word. Like, if somebody was suffering here to the level of Job, would 3 or 4 of us show up and just sit in the dust with them for 7 days and just feel that suffering with them before we spoke? I mean, these are things that we read right over, but these are close covenantal type relationships, and a friend relationship can be one based on covenant, even if it's not like a formal covenant. So Luke, we're going to finish up with what I think is the ultimate example of this. Luke 22. Luke 22, 39 through 46. Luke 22, let's start reading in verse 39. Of course, we all know the context of this, right? And he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation," or trial, testing. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." So we have this relationship. He knows what's got to happen, but he's still saying the words anyway. He's still asking, "Please don't do this to me. I know it's got to happen, but I just have to say it. I don't want to go through this." I think is another way of saying it. Like, he's acknowledging that he doesn't want to go through it. He's not, in this moment, he's not trying to be this strong, macho guy who feels no fear and who he has everything together and he's just this penultimate man of faith, which we know he was. I'm not doubting that. But in the moment here, in a human body that is subject to the same things we are, the book of Hebrews says that he suffered, he learned obedience through suffering, right? So he goes through the same stuff we do. And he is basically acknowledging, I do not want to go through this, but I will if you want me to. 43, now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not enter into temptation or tribulation. And so here is, the ultimate example of how we are to walk in this earth. When we read those servant chapters in Isaiah, they alternate between calling Israel as a people the servant and calling the servant the servant. So he is the ultimate representative of what Israel is. This whole idea of striving and struggling and contending. He's contending with the Father here. We don't always think of it in those terms, but he is wrestling here. He knows he's going to get the blessing because when he was tested by Satan earlier, he said, I can give you all the kingdoms of this world if you just bow down and worship me. But he didn't need to do that because he knew that if he continued his mission here on earth, the Father was going to give that to him anyway. So why take the shortcut? So he wrestled all night long and held out for the blessing. And I know that we don't normally think of it in those terms because it's the Messiah we're talking about here, but he was down here with us as one of us when all this happened. Even he said those hard things. And so I think the moral of the story with all this is that instead of, when we come to these valleys, when we come to these times of crushing, instead of feeling guilt or shame or any of these other things, when we have these thoughts of, why are you doing this to me? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you stepping in and saving me? It's okay to be honest and admit that we don't want to be in that position. Even if we get angry, even if we have questions like, what did I do to deserve this? I don't think it's healthy as Israelites to hold that in and sweep it under the rug like it's not there. I think the Father expects us to hold him accountable to his promises that he's made to us. And as crazy as that sounds, I think he set up a model where he expects that, where he really legitimately wants us to call upon him. We have that parable, where from Yahshua, where the woman, the widow, keeps going to the judge to have her case heard, and he ignores her, and he won't hear. She keeps going to him and bugging him, and finally he's like, fine, I'll hear your case just to get you off my back. This is an unrighteous worldly judge. How much more, right? How much more will the judge hear us? If an unrighteous judge will eventually yield and do the right thing, how much more will the ultimate judge of righteousness do that? He never promises it's going to be instant. He never promises it's going to be, blessing, 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 blessing. In this life, we get the blessing and the curse in some capacity. But I think, as a community here, and hopefully we're all trying to be a community, I believe very firmly that a community has to have communication and commitment. And of course, the commitment to Elohim is the one that we all focus on, right? The covenantal relationship. But I think the communication part, that open, honest communication with him, even if it's ugly, I think if we can allow ourselves that and give ourselves the grace to be able to do that, I think it shows that we have more faith in that relationship. And it sounds paradoxical almost, right? Like if you're questioning him, you're questioning the covenant, you're questioning the relationship. But all these other people in the Bible did exactly that, and everything seems to be fine with them. And these are people that are lifted up as men after Yahweh's own heart. These are people that end up in the Faith Hall of Fame, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. That was all I had. Hopefully that's encouraging. If you want to dig into this theme, there's plenty of source material in the scripture. There are plenty of adverse situations in the Bible. The prophets almost always start off with this doom and gloom message, and then they end it with a message of hope. And, the Father is always letting us know he's here. There's a safety net, but he's not just going to pave the way and make it all a bed of roses for us. We're allowed to have that contending. We're allowed to go through these dark places, but I think by allowing ourselves the freedom to do that, we allow covenantally him the freedom to come there with us, if that makes sense. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to stop the recording here.